Welcome to our daily business podcast here at Business in Vancouver. It's called Coping with COVID-19. It's from the newsroom of Business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. We're adapting our workplaces considerably in the pandemic, of course, creating all kinds of new collaborations and identifying new ways to develop career paths with remote. One organization that I think is a very interesting one to study and seen its role augment is Mitacs, which is the nonprofit national research organization based here in Vancouver. It works with academia, businesses, and government as partnerships in a variety of programs to train graduate level students as they launch their careers. John Hepburn is the CEO and the Chief Scientific Officer of Mitacs. He joins me now to talk about this. Good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Kirk. Happy to talk about Mitacs always.
Yeah, not many places got to say that they got a real lift out of the pandemic, but the federal government has identified Mitacs as a very strategically important partner between government and business and the academy in all of this. What kind of raise did you all get as as an organization?
Well, Mitacs is funded. Our largest single funder, of course, is the federal government. They gave us a 50% increase in funding. That was the $40 million, where we get significant funding from the federal government. But we also get funding from all 10 provinces, and most, but not all of the provinces also gave us a boost in our funding. So we got significantly more money this year than we had last year.
And when you take a look at where that money goes or how it's applied, I would imagine that a lot of people watching our podcast are slightly unfamiliar with the way in which Mitacs allocates the funds and applies it in terms of developing these partnerships. Talk a little bit about the general nature of the partnerships and collaborations that are created here.
Yeah, so we are a research support organization, but the primary motivation of everything we do is to boost innovation in Canada. And we do this through internships, student internships, and we're, by the way, branching out beyond graduate students and postdoctoral fellows into undergraduate students and even college students.
Okay.
And we take a different approach than the standard one. Standard approach is what we call technology push, where inventions get created at a post-secondary institution, and then you sort of find applications for them outside of the university. We reverse that process. We have business development people across the country, about 75 of them, and we're kind of based in Vancouver. We have large offices in Montreal and Toronto and Ottawa as well. And the 75 business development people are spread across the country. They talk to industry or other organizations, find out what their problems are, and then try and match them with an academic researcher and his students to come up with a partnership to address the problem that's been identified.
And when it's a partnership, in this case here, do the students spend a certain amount of time in their academic settings and a certain amount of time in, say, an office setting? Is that the way?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a typical partnership, it would be between an industry and an academic laboratory, and the students would spend roughly half their time in each place. I mean, the idea is not just to solve the problem that industry may have, but also to link the university researchers and the industry needs. So we do want the students to spend time in both places. That's a requirement.
So then I suppose everything turns itself back to COVID to discuss.
Yes.
So when you're dealing with so many people working remotely, what have been some of the more immediate impacts on the Mitacs work out there in the country?
Well, obviously, I mean, for the Mitacs staff, many of whom were used to working remotely anyways, the business development people, as I said, are spread around the country. But of course, obviously, all 230 of us suddenly, from one day to the next, we all went home. And, you can see I'm working from what used to be my youngest son's bedroom, and, people are working from home.
Yeah.
For our interns, of course, many of them were doing laboratory research, and a lot of labs shut down. I mean, labs immediately connected with finding solutions to the health crisis were allowed to remain open as essential services. But we have interns working on all sorts of things. We confirmed with the partners that if it was possible to do the research and do the innovation remotely, that was perfectly fine with us. So some of the projects pivoted to more remote work and less lab work or no lab work. Some of the projects that really heavily relied on lab work that was not considered essential to the COVID crisis, we allowed them to have a gap, to postpone part of the work, things like that. So we just made accommodations. I'm happy to say that virtually none of the ongoing projects were actually canceled as a result of the crisis. That was a big concern because companies don't have a lot of cash these days, as
Yeah.
you know. Fortunately, with the federal government pumping money into companies, we had actually most of our projects were maintained, perhaps on a delayed basis, but we actually found that the projects were maintained.
Can you already recognize some of the changes in the kinds of applications that are coming your way? Are they kind of, pandemic related?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We launched before we got the notice of the $40 million coming in from the federal government. We decided very early on, once we all went into lockdown, to launch a special call for COVID-19 solutions.
Mhm.
And we hope to get a few hundred applications in, perhaps. That has taken off like wildfire, and we were also able to offer a subsidy to small and medium enterprises. I mean, all of our programs are matching funds. The industry puts in typically half, and we put in half with our taxpayer supported funding. We were able with small and medium enterprises to cut their contribution to 25% to help with their cash crunch.
I see.
And we've had, I mean, the number keeps going up. We've had 1,300 internships supported through this specific COVID-19 call.
Yeah. Is it getting pretty fully subscribed? I mean, do you actually have a pattern that you can roll this out over a stretch of time, or was this like this one shot coming from the federal government and the provinces almost immediately fully subscribed?
It's not fully subscribed, but we're basically for the COVID-19 specific call, there were a bunch of components to it. One of them was that we peer review all of our projects to make sure that they're, scientifically sound and that the company is good and that this, everybody involved is good. These ones we promised that we would do the review very quickly because it was a crisis. And so we wanted to get solutions started immediately. We also put a time limit on it. So it was basically you could apply up to June 15th. And of course, we were a little bit elastic on the definition of the end date. We didn't completely close the shutters. But basically that competition is closed. Then we have to evaluate how much money we have left. We've still got plenty of money, but we've got regular business that rolls in year round. We don't have set deadlines. So right now we're way above schedule, partly because of this COVID-19 call and some other things we've done. But we have to be careful not to run out of money in December, sort of thing. So right now we're doing very well. Business is booming, but
Yeah.
as I say, there's a lot of money being pumped into the system, including by us.
And what are you learning as an organization about some of the direction of even the kinds of projects that are being developed in this country all of a sudden? What is the pandemic teaching Mitacs about a little bit about the resilience of our scientific community, but secondly, more or less the piece of innovation that we seem to have?
I think one of the things, and we've seen this in a couple of cases. One of the things is the value of talent, especially in these small and medium enterprises where they don't have a huge research capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So having these very, very bright students in there working has allowed them to pivot in this crisis period to change what they're working on. Of course, a lot of companies have developed pandemic related projects that they wouldn't have otherwise done. And some of that comes from the company itself, and some of it comes from the students who are working there saying, look, why don't we just based on their connections back to the university, based on just being very bright young people, they make suggestions for things companies can do. And we've had a couple of companies basically pivot and create new products as a result of student suggestions, frankly.
Yeah. I like to learn at this stage in what all of us are going through about what some of the early anticipations were and whether they've been borne out, whether there are essentially there's a larger list of worries or fewer. Where do you come across on that one?
Well, I remember when we went into, full pandemic lockdown, we started, running town halls to reassure the staff. And at the first town hall, virtually all the questions from staff were, are there going to be layoffs? Are we in deep financial trouble because our business is all going to go away? That quickly shifted, especially after the federal government trusted us with the extra funding and gave us a larger mandate. Then the questions all shifted to, oh my God, there's so much work. We're all going out of our minds working, 7 days a week, 15 hours a day. We can't survive this. So we went from worrying about having no business to worrying about having too much business. And now I'd say my concern is what happens next. Right now we're living not quite in a fool's paradise, but we're living in a situation where, we heard the financial update, not, I don't know what to call it, not the financial update, but
Snapshot.
The declaration, the snapshot. Thank you. The declaration of this huge amount of money. And we all knew this, you could just do your own edition. The federal government and the provincial governments have pumped a huge amount of money into the system. And I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, but it can't go on forever. And so right now business is booming for us, which is good news for Canada, because it means all these innovative companies are continuing to innovate. What happens in the fall? What happens in the winter? I think everybody is now realizing, and our neighbors to the south are proving it beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt, that the pandemic hasn't gone away. That if we pretend that the economy can go back to the way it was last December, we're all going to get sick.
Yeah.
So we're in this for the long haul, and Mitacs is very concerned about preserving the innovation economy in Canada.
Well, yeah, it is interesting that one of the areas that hasn't apparently at least suffered economically has been the knowledge sector, right? The knowledge economy is actually doing reasonably well in all of this. There's a lot of other manufacturing areas and so on that are really in dire straits. So what does that tell you about how the country might be using this period wisely in order to try to do slightly more pivoting toward it and slightly more incentives in order to do so?
Well, I speak from a position of bias. Obviously, I'm a big believer in highly skilled people doing, the best innovation they can. I think that's the future for the Canadian economy. We know very well that the Canadian economy has not been very innovative. It's been based on a supply chain with our big neighbors to the south. Well, of course, with the sort of political developments south of the border, that's been put under constant threat.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we discovered that we couldn't rely on international supply chains necessarily for critically important things like personal protective equipment and stuff like that, that was a bit of a wake-up call for Canada. In other words, we can't rely on others for our prosperity. And so I think I'm a big believer that the government and industry, for that matter, needs to do whatever it can to support, true innovation. That's not just based on how do we produce things faster for others, and also paying attention to international markets beyond south of the border.
It's a very large discretionary fund that the federal government has around innovation. I think it's probably the second largest discretionary field of spending after defense, right? So are we learning anything in this period about how we maximize the return on that? How we make sure it's not spending that is assisting everybody but ourselves.
Well, I think one of the keys is a balance in what gets supported. I mean, I think it is critical to support the sort of fundamental discovery-based research, which is what the granting councils do, and what a lot of the work at universities is. But at the same time, to support truly innovation-based research and development, and by that I mean, solutions to real problems, not sort of solutions to imaginary problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the key, and this is certainly the way that we behave, the key is partnerships, making sure that it's not a knowledge transfer all the time, where knowledge gets created somewhere and transferred somewhere else for hopefully an application. But it's a knowledge mobilization where a partnership truly means that both sides are learning from one another. That, and in this specific example of universities and industry, but it's not restricted to that. That universities truly understand what the industrial problem is, and industry takes full advantage of the knowledge that's available in universities to solve that problem. And that's not always been the model for these sorts of things.
No, but does that require that there be a practical application of almost everything that's worked on as a partnership, or can there still be some room for exploration?
Oh no, I think there has to be room for exploration, and that's research is all about. I mean, academic research largely is about this sort of discovery where you're not really sure what's going to be the result. I think that we have to keep that going, and the government does invest very, very generously. And I mean, I come from I'm a researcher myself, or I'll use the past tense. I was a researcher myself. I was, VP research at University of British Columbia. So I, was responsible for a very large academic research enterprise. And I really respect the value of that. And, Canada doesn't do badly in supporting frontline academic research. It could always do better, but it doesn't do badly. I think where Canada falls down is in making the connection between the brain power we have in universities, which is formidable, and the needs of industry, not-for-profits, and frankly, even government. There's a lot of brain power out there, and I don't think there's a lack of willingness from most academic researchers to help out, but they don't have the connections. They don't. They're busy people, and so somebody needs to help them discover what the issues are that they might be able to address.
What's your speculate, if you can, for a minute here? The advance of remote work and its seeming permanence has led us to believe a couple of things. One is that first of all, we're not really traveling as much as we're, as we have, and we're unlikely to travel as much in the future for a while. Yet the other concern is that somehow, we're not necessarily going to keep all of this talent working remotely for Canadian purposes. That you're going to have people now that can frankly work for Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley would be very happy to have you up here in British Columbia, work for them. So is there a strategy that you can speculate on that might to do a bit of that?
That may be above my pay grade. I mean, yes, it is. There's two sides to the coin. I mean, one of the wonderful things, I was on a roundtable discussion with the Business Council of British Columbia organized about, the crisis in the knowledge industry, in fact. And somebody pointed out that, well, you can live in Nelson and still work for a high-tech Vancouver company, and that's great because it's cheaper to live in Nelson, and maybe some people would view it as more pleasant. It's very true. But you could also live in Nelson and work for somebody in Santa Clara.
Yeah.
So it's like, you're right. I think the key is to create the interesting and challenging jobs and well-paid jobs in Canada that will keep people. I mean, the reason, people go to Silicon Valley not necessarily because it's the climate's better. They go there because they get paid more. They have access to a higher level of problems. If you're in something data science related, well, Google has all the data, so why not work for them? So I think the need is to create larger, more interesting companies in Canada that will keep people in Canada. I mean, I can't blame talented young people if they think that they're going to get paid a lot more and do more interesting things in Silicon Valley. Well, they should go. There's nothing preventing them.
There goes the intellectual property as well, right? At times.
Oh, absolutely. No, and that's a huge challenge in Canada is are we developing intellectual property for big American companies? Some of that's inevitable. I mean, the world is hopefully going to remain an open place, and intellectual property will flow around. But it sure would be nice to reverse the flow and have intellectual property coming up from the United States.
Yeah.
Let's imagine that.
For the time being, it is imagining.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question, and maybe it is too soon to speculate on this part for yourself, but can you see a different Mitacs emerging as the pandemic goes along that will have some permanence to it?
Well, we're actually discussing with our friends in government exactly that. I mean, the federal funding was an increase for 1 year only, and so Mitacs is ramping up to deliver 17,000 internships this year, and we think we're going to get there. We're fairly confident. Mm-hmm. So next year, do we go back to 10? That's what our guaranteed funding is for next year is on order of 10,000 internships. So we hope to remain big. We think we know there's a lot more demand out there. Even in the current economic crisis, we're seeing a lot of demand. I think there's a need to do more of these sort of innovation-based internships. Absolutely. And so Mitacs hopes to get bigger because I think there's a lot of work to be done, and it's necessary work.
And it's not just simply Mitacs' own expectation. Do you believe also that business now is going to come to a different conclusion about what it requires in order to develop skills in its workforce and innovation in its place with the support of government? Is there a bit of a movement of business toward more of a government involvement in that economy?
I think a government encouragement and involvement in the sense of providing targeted funding for things. I think yes, business in Canada. One of the reasons for lack of innovation is business in Canada tends not to utilize the talent that's available. Again, getting back to why do people go to Silicon Valley? Well, because there's a demand for them in Silicon Valley that may not exist in Canada. And so I think for businesses to realize that people with more advanced training from the universities actually can be very innovative, can be very useful. And one of the we always consider it a triumph at Mitacs when we work with a small and medium enterprise that would never ever imagine that they could use a PhD, and they take one on as an intern because it's subsidized, it's short term, it's low risk, and they discover that people with PhDs can actually solve real life problems. And then they decide to hire a PhD. And we've seen that again and again where companies recognize that there's really a value in having really smart people working for them. That they're not just academic researchers who all want to be professors.
And we are moving toward an era where those high skills are going to be even more in demand. There's no question about that. Absolutely.
And I think that, Canada, the sad thing for Canada is that we're really, really good at producing these. I mean, there's a reason why international students from around the world come to Canada. Our universities are fabulous. We've got so many top-rated universities in Canada. So we don't have a talent shortage. We've just got a demand shortage. And that's, we would like to reverse that at Mitacs. We'd like there to be a desperate undersupply of talent in Canada so that we don't lose people to Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Well, John Hepburn, CEO, Chief Scientific Director at Mitacs, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for your help today.
Thank you very much for your interest. It's been fun.
You've been watching the BIV Daily Podcast. I'm Kirk LaPointe. We'll see you again.